U.S. Senator Chris Murphy met with Connecticut's Ukrainian community this morning following his trip to Eastern Europe 2 weeks ago. The senator is a member of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He says the goal of the trip was to reaffirm the U.S.'s commitment to regional partners and strengthen democratic reforms. During a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Senator Murphy and other members of the bipartisan delegation expressed their support for Ukraine against Russian aggression. However, they also pressed for more progress on anti-corruption, security service, and corporate governance reform. President Biden has invited President Zelenskyy to visit the White House later this summer.
I don't know that they're going to come to any conclusions in that meeting, but it's going to be very important for the topic of Ukraine to be front and center, for President Biden to make clear to Vladimir Putin that his continued occupation of Crimea and eastern Ukraine is unacceptable and that the United States will not rest until Russia is out of Crimea and is out of eastern Ukraine.
Wednesday, President Biden will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Geneva for their first summit. Senator Murphy says he wants the topic of Ukraine to be front and center for President Biden to speak out against Russia's military aggression.
In other news here, we have an alert before you go.